Is French secularism in crisis? Has laïcité, the very strict, some might say militant separation between church and state, become an excuse to bash French Muslims, especially in the run-up to a presidential election and in the wake of attacks in Paris and Nice? Or are too many French Muslims guilty of rejecting the very basics of French national identity, including the country's long tradition of secularism? Joining me now to debate this are French Senator Nathalie Goulet, who sits on the Senate's Foreign Affairs Committee. She also co-authored a recent report on the foreign funding of French mosques. Benjamin Haddad, a research fellow at the Hudson Institute, specialising in European affairs and a former advisor to French political leaders. And from Paris, Yasser Louati, a civil rights activist and former spokesman for the Collective Against Islamophobia in France. Thanks all for joining me on UpFront. I want to kick off with a question for all of you. Has the very strict secularism, has laïcité, enshrined in French law since 1905, extended in recent years to religious symbols in public, to bans on religious symbols, has it lost its way in France? Has it become an excuse, a pretext to attack religion in general, Islam in particular? Nathalie, kick off with you.
We do not recognize communities. You know, that is very important to understand, that the French citizens, they are all French citizens before being member of any community. And I don't think so. We just issue a report in the Senate showing clearly that Islam is totally compatible with the principle of the Republic and the legal frame, and especially the secularism law of 1905. So I don't think so, really.
So if everything is fine, why did you write in an op-ed after the Nice attack in July that French society is sick? What did you mean by that?
When we have attacks and we have to face terrorism, you have to react.
Yes.
And the way to react was maybe not the right one. And then we are facing also a political campaign, which is very tough. And the people are a little bit lost and hurt.
Yasser Louati, has French secularism lost its way?
What's happening is that we have had a relentless effort that's been going on for the past 20 or 30 years in order to pervert the secular law that we call laïcité. The original law of laïcité that was passed in 1905 was actually in protection of all religions, but with the rising visibility of Muslims, the far right and then now more and more left-wing parties are using laïcité as an excuse to turn it against Muslims. What France needs today is to go back to the original laïcité and stop taking laïcité from being a constitutional principle to become an ideological tool for dominating the Muslim population in France.
Okay, well let me put that point to Benjamin Haddad. A lot of outsiders looking at France, even people living in other European secular countries, look at it and think, yes, it does look like the French political media elites are using secularism to quote Yasser, dominate Muslims or to make Muslims invisible.
Yeah, but I think that's a misunderstanding of the idea of laïcité and secularism in the French political tradition. I mean, you have to go back to the history of religious conflicts, to the outsized role that the Catholic Church has played in French history, in the French monarchy, and then, you know, in the early age of the Republic, to understand why there's such an attachment to it. Now, it's true that this principle has to readapt because it's a different situation now with Islam. It's a recent phenomenon. You know, French society has tried to grapple with the emergence of Islam as a social phenomenon in the last few decades. So sometimes it does lead to awkward debates, but I don't think it's going too far.
A fair few French politicians are starting to question the way it's being implemented. The former Justice Minister Rachida Dati wrote recently that French politicians have, quote, propounded a definition of laïcité that wrongly seeks to exclude religion from the public sphere. The former Housing Minister, Benoît Apparoux, says laïcité has morphed into secular totalitarianism. Nathalie?
Well, you know, first of all, we have to face ignorance. That is the first point. And then the second one, a lot of people considered till now that Islam is a religion coming from abroad and doesn't belong to the French society. And we have to fight against this idea because it's totally wrong. So at the same time, Islam was not part of the society when the 1905 law was built. So we have to review everything, and including the fact that we have more than 5 million of Muslims in France, which is more than 10% of the population. And that creates now a debate which is a pure democratic debate.
Would you change anything about the way that French secularism is practiced, given the recent debates, crises, criticisms?
You know, when everything is moving around you, you better have to stick to your regulation and to what is the common basis of our legal frame. So I don't think we have to move anything. We have to explain that the state is a secularist, not the people, not the cemetery, and not the shop, and not the swimming suits.
Let me put that point to Yasser. You would agree that secularism is about the state, not society. Is that how it's being practiced in your view?
Well, first we have to come back to the historic point of view. When the 1905 was passed, there were Muslims in France. As a matter of fact, the whole of Algeria was part of France, but laicity was not applied there in order to keep the Muslim faith under colonial domination. But to join Mrs. Goulet on her point, I do agree on the fact that laicity needs to be brought back to be used as a principle to grant freedom of religion and not used as an ideological tool.
Okay, but Benjamin, when you look at France today with its problems, it's in the middle of a European Union that's could all fall apart, a Eurozone financial crisis, austerity economics, youth unemployment, huge housing and socio-economic issues. And yet you see French politicians talking about bikinis, hijabs, veils, halal meat. You can understand why a lot of French Muslims feel like they're being targeted under the guise of secularism.
Yeah, no, it's true. But at the same time, I do think the question of identity and integration are very central to our societies. And so we're trying to grapple with this. We're trying to adapt principles to the emergence of Islam in French society. Unfortunately, it's also done in a very tense social context where you mentioned a few issues, but there's also the issue of terrorism and radicalization over the last 2 years. So of course there's confusion. It's very unfortunate, but 200 people have been killed over the last 2 years. So this is something you have to understand to understand the context of this.
Is banning the burkini, the full-body Muslim swimwear on French beaches, is that the solution to terrorism?
No, but first no one said it had anything to do with terrorism.
I think Manuel Valls, the Prime Minister, suggested that. I think he did. He suggested the security.
By the way, the ban was only in 15 towns. It was overturned by the French administration.
Supported by the Prime Minister of France. I don't think
he supported the ban. But what he said, though, is that he did not consider that it was just some normal swimwear. And I think that's a legitimate debate to have, in a debate about the burqa, or the veil in general, as a sign of patriarchy, as a sign of religious conservatism. I think coming from a secular socialist, Manuel Valls is not a man of the right or the far right. There's also a lot of people on the left, like Charlie Hebdo, like Manuel Valls, like others, who are against religions in general, religious conservatism in society, and debated that. So I think there is a French tendency to over-legislate on these things, and I think that it was rightly overturned by the Conseil d'État. But there's the fact that there's a philosophical, intellectual, political debate about the place of religion in society.
There were armed police officers. We saw a photo that went viral of male police officers on a beach asking women to disrobe.
That was overturned by the Conseil d'État.
And whether it was overturned or not, what was your reaction to that picture? A lot of people around the world were pretty disgusted. But
no, I wrote that I was against the ban, but at the same time, I think it's a legitimate debate to have.
I didn't ask about the ban. I asked about police officers on a beach.
But that was related to the ban.
But it was beyond the ban. It was police officers asking a woman to disrobe on a beach. It's the kind of thing you might expect in Saudi Arabia or Iran, a religious clothing police, but not in France. Let me put the point to Yasser that Benjamin makes the point here that you have to deal with these issues of identity and integration. We're discussing this in the context of more than 200 people being killed in France in attacks over the past year, 18 months. You can't ignore that fact, can you?
Oh, just first, among those 240 people, a lot of them were Muslims. Yes. Don't forget that. So no, I'm very uncomfortable when people speak about our fellow countrymen and women being killed and then putting this in opposition to debates about Muslims. Muslims were not responsible for the attacks. The state failed to prevent these attacks despite a whole lot of anti-terror measures. But now to bring to you, first you spoke about the burkini ban, and I will quote to you, for example, Mr. David Thompson, who is known to work on these terror groups. He said, I quote, the image of a woman being stripped by the police on a public beach will feed ISIL's narrative for the coming decades. That's for one. Second, if you want to speak about Muslims, how come every single time we speak about Muslims, it is either under the lens of terrorism, security measures, threat to identity, threat to French culture. It is never about the new French people and our new brothers and sisters under the French banner. If you are a Muslim person, you are 4 times less likely to get a job. If you are a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, you have 1% chance of getting a job. If you are an Arab, you have 9 chances of being harassed by the police, 4 times if you are black.
Okay.
So all I'm sorry, it is more than time to accept these people as French citizens and not a threat coming from Mars or Jupiter.
Okay, Natalie?
No, I mean, I cannot do anything else than agree with what he said. But at the same time, you cannot show France as a Islamophobic country. I mean, that is not fair.
The polling suggests that nearly 2/3 of French people think Islam has become too visible in France.
Yes.
47%, almost half, say the Muslim community in France is a threat to national identity. If that's not Islamophobia, what is?
No, I even say on air after Bataclan that he will bring a hell of Islamophobia. I mean, that is a reaction. I don't say that the reaction is fair. But what you also have to know is that the global French system is very uncomfortable with people who are not organized. And so now that we have a better organization of the Muslim communities, the young Muslim who want to take part of the civil society, they also have to be more visible. And right now, I think that it's exactly what happened.
Muslims should be more visible in France?
Absolutely.
Isn't that part of the problem? You have polling, people saying they're too visible.
No,
we don't want to see headscarves.
No,
we don't want to see people on beaches swimming.
We do not have
They should be visible on French terms.
No French terms.
What does visible mean then? I'm just
more elected people,
okay.
More taking care of the civil election, more being part of civil council, municipal council. I mean, be part of the civil society from another point of view.
It's a strange position to put the onus on fighting discrimination on the minority community. Many might say that would be an odd position to take in any other country of the world. We're running out of time. Yasser, I want to ask you this question. You are in Paris, you're in France, where the polls show that the majority of your fellow French citizens do support burkini bans, do support bans on niqab in public, do value laïcité, new laïcité as you put it, more than other political principles. I think a third of the French population say they believe in God, so a minority. You're fighting a losing battle, aren't you, in terms of making your case for French Muslims? The public are not with you. What do you do about that?
Absolutely not. This is a question of education. We lost the battle of education starting for the years 2000. Don't forget, for example, in the early 2000s, when the French population was polled about the hijab ban, it was about 47-49 against and for the ban. So people were kind of split, but there was a huge effort to actually work on the French population to make them believe that the hijab ban was necessary. And I made a presentation about that. You can see the curves being separate the moment Jacques Chirac declares, who was then president, that he was in opposition to the hijab.
So going forward, you're an optimist or a pessimist?
When you have a one-way discourse from politicians and the media.
So going forward, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I'm always optimistic.
Benjamin?
I'm optimistic too, and I'll tell you why. When you look at the polls, actually, France is one of the countries in Europe where you have the lowest level of rejection of Muslims, much lower than it is in Southern Europe, much lower than it is in Eastern Europe. It's still too high, but it's very comparable to Germany and the UK. So it's still a debate.
So you don't believe there needs to be any kind of new accommodation done, any reform? Status quo can hold?
I don't think status quo can hold. I think on the one hand, you need to do more to integrate, you need to do more to promote a new elite. And I think on the other hand, you have to fight the minority religious radicalism that is also the first victims of this are Muslims, Muslim women, Muslim boys in these neighborhoods. You have to do both in a very, very tough way.
Natalie?
Well, I think that we have a debate. We don't have to move this regulation, as I told you previously. But please put this country into brackets for the time of the election, because we will have a passionate debate.
You think after the election things will get better?
I think that things will get better.
What if after the election the president is Marine Le Pen?
No,
the National Front.
Let's cross the finger. But I think that we have to be back to back to basic and to education and fight ignorance and learn back to live together, because we lost the compass. And right now we totally lost the compass. We have to tell that, but it doesn't mean that the bottom of the society is Islamophobic.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for joining me on UpFront for this very important discussion. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.